Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Max, especially for joining us for another of the Data Mesh Learning Community Meetups. So Max is going to be talking about some, 10 do's and don'ts of data mesh, what he's learned from, almost 3 years now, I think, of doing data mesh in practice. And so Max has been somebody, if you go on YouTube and you search his name, you're going to find a lot of very good presentations. He's been presenting on this for, multiple years now, like as well. And so he's been one of the person out there that's talked about like, what have we gotten wrong? What are the things that we've learned? What is like, how do we iterate on this? So I'm very excited for this. And Max, I'm just going to kick it over to you. I'm going to go on mute, and then kind of at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. So everybody, please, if you've got questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A during, and we'll address them at the end. With that, Max, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for the great intro, Scott. And thanks a lot also to all of you folks for being here today. It's a great pleasure to be on here. Finally made it. First time we actually tried to run this meetup. Unfortunately, I got stuck down by COVID, but now I'm finally up and running again, and I'm able to actually kick this off here and to talk to you folks about 10 do's and don'ts of data mesh, right? But before diving straight into the topic itself, again, a little bit of my background as well, so that you can also maybe get a bit better understanding of like where my whole connection to data mesh actually comes from, right? So first of all, I'm this, how Scott amazingly called it, banana-suited gentleman. I've been around in the tech scene, in the data space already for many, many years, but I've also been a data engineering manager at Zalando, which is Europe's biggest online platform for fashion. Maybe that's a little bit where the connection of the colors is also coming from, but I try to give a bit of my own touch as well to that. What I've been mostly working on is to productionize large-scale data infrastructure and data management platforms. Yeah, meaning setting up distributed storage, distributed compute, lots and lots of tools and services around that, and really scaling this to like hundreds and thousands of internal users that are then actually using these systems to for their day-to-day work when it actually comes to working with data. Right, but being especially on the infrastructure, on the platform side, also made me feel a lot of the pain points that were actually driving me into the direction of data mesh. And when Jean-Marc for the first time talked about this concept, I think it's like more than 3 years ago now already, I felt kind of understood. And that was actually quite an interesting situation, because a lot of the things that were talked about in the original concept were things that were very close and near and dear to me, in the sense that the problems that she was describing were problems that we were having. Even some of the ideas towards the solutions were things that we were already getting involved with as well. And that's why very early we started to also take the public stage to talk about our experiences, right? At first, it was just a reflection on where do we actually stand, like compared to this new concept that just came around the block. What are the things that we already started doing by ourselves that moved into that direction, right? But it became, of course, more and more around that, like actually evolving the concept itself and advocating it more and more, and also becoming a content creator in this area. Been doing a lot of O'Reilly trainings. I've written a small booklet on the topic as well, that I will also link once more towards the end of the session if you're curious about. But enough about me. Let's actually jump straight into the 10 do's and don'ts of data mesh, starting with the very first one, demystify the buzzword. Yes, this is a data mesh meetup, so I'm very much expecting that a lot of you folks already have a good understanding of the basics around data mesh, but I think it's always important to just cover the basic part, so that you really ensure that everybody's on the same page, that we can run through the rest of the presentation together. So demystifying the buzzword, what does data mesh actually mean? Data mesh comes usually in 4 pillars, right? And it all starts with actually treating data as a product. And what do we mean by that? Well, we all know like physical products that we can buy in a supermarket and that are designed to actually reach higher sales targets and to satisfy the users, right? So let's ensure that we actually do the same thing for data. We want to satisfy our users. We want to ensure that our data is as valuable as possible when we actually share it with others. And that does mean do not take the data as it is originally produced with all the technical details and tons of colors and columns and structures that don't matter to anyone that actually wants to make sense of it. But actually put in some emphasis on understanding how the data is supposed to look like, understanding the use cases that you actually want to serve, and tailor the data that you're sharing to the needs of the people that actually want to work with this data, right? And this comes in with a lot of ideas, of course, around putting product thinking in place, putting product managers in place, putting people in teams that can understand who are the different stakeholders, what are their actual needs, right? Are they happy with the things that we are providing them? How can I maybe also expand my market share? Like, what are the people that might want to use my product, but that don't even know yet that it actually exists, or that are not convinced yet that this is actually the right thing to use for answering their business questions, right? But ultimately, it all boils down to having the business people in your organization having open questions that are required to be answered to make decisions for the business, and they need data to back this up. So the data that they get to back up this decision should be of the highest possible quality. It should be data as a product. The next thing is then to actually frame a little bit who is supposed to present the data and to work with the data that we are sharing here, right? And to actually think about the concept of domains, where, for instance, just asking the question, who are usually the people that know best the content of the data that is being shared across the organization? Well, it's usually the people that are closest to where the data is originally produced. And this means that we want to emphasize this connection, and that we actually want to, on the one hand side, empower the people to actually work with the data and present the data in a proper way, but also to actually put a responsibility on them, right? That you actually say, we don't share dirty data anymore. We ensure that the right people that know the best about the data also take on the ownership about the data that is then presented to others. And that comes with a lot of crucial conscious decisions that you need to make as well. For instance, to also decide to not share certain parts of the data if you think they are not, again, valuable for the business part, as described in the first section here. And of course, these boundaries then also mean that on the one hand side, you enable the teams within certain business domains to take the decisions on their own and to start becoming more agile again, to actually move faster and to make decisions by themselves, because you're no longer sharing technical implementation details across the organization, but you're actually encapsulating things behind good interfaces that are then the parts that the people actually integrate with. But it doesn't only end at the part of actually providing the data itself, it also comes with additional responsibility around describing the data. It comes with additional responsibilities around making sure this data is accessible. You can actually find it, for instance, in a data catalog because somebody put an entry there. And you have all the information needed to actually find this data, but also then be able to work with it in a proper way. But again, a lot of these things are about pushing responsibilities on those teams, and you cannot just like put more burden and more load on those people that usually are already overloaded if you don't also give them the respective support. And this is where the data infrastructure platform actually comes in. That's where a lot of the experience that I'm actually bringing to the table is coming from, to ensure that you actually have the right tools for the people in the respective domains, and that you actually offer them through a data infrastructure platform. But not in the sense that you actually lend them data engineers to actually build a pipeline for them, but rather that you actually build self-services that they can then use in an as easy and convenient way possible to actually build their data products, right? And a couple things mentioned already there, right? You want to have things like compute resources, storage capacities, I don't know, scheduling capabilities, just to name a couple that are very close to the infrastructure side. But it also goes way beyond that, like cataloging capabilities, compliance capabilities, governance possibilities. And this also leads me straight to the next point, which is federated governance. That's the fourth pillar, that you actually want to ensure that now that you have like these domains that are actually grouped together and that work somewhat in isolation, that you still ensure that we are not building silos over and over again, that we are like completely encapsulating any type of processing within their bubble to only be stuck among themselves, but to still ensure that while on the one hand side, we want to enable local decision-making within the domains, we still have the possibility to bring together people from the different domains to talk about the things that actually need to be aligned across them, to actually bring them into the position, for instance, when there are touch points where certain data sets need to be interoperable across domains, right? I don't know, a user ID in one domain can mean something completely else than a user ID in another domain. So you need to actually have these discussions. You need to bring the people together to have these conversations and to actually ensure that data stays interoperable across the organization. And this is also the point where you are injecting a lot of these like additional governance functionalities like compliance that I just mentioned, right? Where you bring in the experts, where you bring in the people that actually like have all the experience and the expertise from the industry to understand best what does, for instance, GDPR mean for you? What does antitrust mean for you? And to actually make those rules, but then not just push them into the respective teams to take care of them, but to again also rethink this from an infrastructure platform perspective, right? What does GDPR mean for a company doesn't mean, let's say, for the specific case of deletion requests from users, it doesn't mean every team now just needs to take care of deletion requests by themselves, but you actually want to offer tooling from the platform perspective that allows you to take care of this on the company scale. That if you have standardized data products across your company, you can, for instance, use a central deletion service that then takes just some base configuration, and then the process can just happen in an automated way without everybody needing to take care of this separately by themselves anymore. That was number one, data mesh, demystify the buzzword. I hope this was just like a little bit of the baseline, but as I mentioned before, I think it's always important to get the baseline straight before you dive deeper into the remaining topics. Number two, commit to the pillars and not the term. There's a bunch of things that I've always heard, like when talking to people at various different organizations, including my own, that are things like data mesh is a hype, right? Data mesh was invented by consultants to make money. We cannot afford a big scale of restructuring. And that is quite interesting because that means that data mesh itself is just a word. Like nobody really associates anything with it except it being a hype, a buzzword, and everybody talking about it, but nobody really knowing what does that mean, right? But at the same time, we always hear these things like data quality objective, data platform evolution, or data governance initiative, right? Like these are the terms that all of a sudden become more acceptable within an organization, where you actually think about, well, this data mesh thingy that is out there that is all hype and fancy, I don't want to deal with that because, I don't know, let another 2 years go into the land and then the next big new hype is there. Yeah, but when I'm thinking about the data quality in my company, for instance, then this is something that is tangible, right? And when I also think about the 4 pillars that I just talked about, like these are things that are much more tangible, and these are things that you, for instance, want to make to mention when you are driving a data strategy within your company, right? Putting things like building data products into such a strategy paper is making it much more tangible because you can define what is a data product actually within the context of your organization. What are the expectations towards the owners, the users, the platform folks? What are the things that need to be built over time? And it makes it much, much more tangible to actually work with these type of things instead of just shouting data mesh everywhere and confusing all the people because everybody thinks something completely different when they hear it. Number 3, start small, but with commitment. And this is actually pretty important to, again, not just take data mesh as a buzzword and as a hype and throw it into your company and start a huge initiative where you now want to sell to everyone, we are doing data mesh in our organization. But again, it actually starts with something that brings value to your business, right? Like a data product MVP. And how do you do that? Like first of all, what is a data product MVP, right? You need to find a use case that is valuable. Yeah, you don't want to just try out something. Don't just do a POC and test out something and either it works or it doesn't, but you're just trashing it afterwards anyways and moving on because maybe you just lost interest halfway through, or there was no real need to actually follow up on this on the business side, right? But that's why you need to find a valuable use case to actually prove that this concept is something that can create value in your organization. And that usually comes with actually finding a motivated team that is actually capable of also taking on such a challenge and to also assign product responsibility to such a team, right? To actually not only focus on implementation details of like understanding how is the data product supposed to look like from a technical perspective and then trying to build that, but really starting from the groundwork of understanding, well, who actually needs that? Again, focused on the business value, right? Bringing in the product folks and like really understanding these use cases, these stakeholders that you're actually doing that for, and take them along the journey right from the start, right? This is how you can actually guarantee that on the one hand side, you're not drifting off. You're not building the next project that goes on for the next 2 years and doesn't get an end because, well, there is a business need. You need to reach something deliverable. You need to actually ship something to production because somebody's actually pushing because they want to use that. But also, and that's just the second half of the middle point that I put in here, while you want to have such a valuable use case, you also need to ensure that you are not taking something that is absolutely business critical, right? Do not push too much pressure on your MVP because you need to allow to make room to make mistakes and learn, right? This is essentially like going in a very, let's say, futuristic scenario on how you want to evolve your company in the future or your data space in your company in the future. So you need to be able to actually learn some things on the way. And that definitely will mean your first data product will probably look like garbage. Yeah. And you will learn a lot of things. You will make a lot of mistakes and you will understand, I don't know, that the interface, how you want to present your data will in the end be a completely different one than what you originally had in mind. Because only while you were actually going through the loops and also on the technical side, but also with the stakeholders, you really get a good understanding of what is it that you actually need. But these are then exactly the things that also transfer forward, where once you have made these mistakes and once you have actually learned from them, this is where once you have proven that despite all the effort that has moved in there, this is actually generating value. But now you have an incredibly solid foundation to, on the one hand side, get the backing from the people from the business side, but on the other side, also have a good understanding on how the setup is supposed to look like, both from the technical and from an organizational angle, so that you can actually move forward and build more data products afterwards. Number 4, I already very briefly touched on it a little bit earlier. Don't overload your people, right? I told definitely that with a data product MVP, you need to find a motivated team, But let's just recall very quickly what is actually the purpose of our MVP, right? I emphasized multiple times, and I cannot do that enough, that it is important that we take this as an opportunity to learn and to make mistakes, but also to prove value to the company. And when we are actually looking at that, right, we are doing this not only from the learning perspective of the individuals, but also to learn what works for us and how do we want to potentially set up the future of our organization in terms of, well, for instance, building more data products, right? But it also means don't put your teams under pressure. Yeah? Do not run your MVP with a team that's already underwater. This will only make it worse. Yeah, if you, again, similar to, or even better, let's combine those two. Take a team that is already loaded, that is responsible for a business critical use case, and now you're telling them on top of what you're already doing, now also turn this into a data product, into the first data product in your organization that nobody actually has any idea on how to do that, and you are supposed to figure this out by yourself. Do you think that's a good idea? I definitely do not think so, because of course they will entirely crumble. Not only will they perform very poorly in terms of delivering on this extra ask that you're putting on top of them, but probably even their normal deliverables will suffer as well, because you're taking away the time that is barely enough to take care of their usual responsibilities. And now you're eating into that time as well, because you ask them to do something else on top of that. Yeah. This project is supposed to focus on innovation for your company. So give it the proper focus. And of course, the ideal setup is always to start with a greenfield project. But barely in any company, this is actually the case, and this is actually how things starting. But even in such situations, when you look across your organizations, you have teams that are in various different situations, right? You have these teams that are completely overloaded, that are taking care of these business critical use cases, and that are completely under the water already, where you definitely don't want to touch them and put even more load on them. But you also have other teams that are maybe already a bit more advanced. Maybe they already were able to offload some of their responsibilities because they automated a bunch of stuff. Maybe they are a bit more tech savvy as well, and they are interested in trying out new technologies, new things, new approaches, new processes. Maybe they already have a product set up as well, where they have a product manager with a team that can actually help you go along the way. And then these are the type of teams where you actually want to run your MVP with. Like, these are the type of teams where you have a much higher chance of actually being successful. And again, achieving the original goal of proving to our company that this can actually create value. And this is the setup that we want to commit on also in the future, moving forward with our organization. Number 5, data platform. That's, like, again, where my heart beats and where I'm actually coming from. Don't build the perfect platform up front. This is incredibly massive, because, like, everybody that has been working on the data platform at some point throughout the years, they know that data platform projects are usually about adding new capabilities and taking 2 years to do so. Because somebody at some point thought that this is a good idea, this is a great capability, this is definitely needed across the organization, and we will follow through on that. And yes, the scope changes 5 million times along the way until you actually have the first deliverable. And then after building something for 2 years and finally shipping something to production that probably by that time is already outdated, then you get the feedback if people actually need it, right? So you won't know everything that will be needed upfront, right? So there will definitely things that you will be missing. You cannot even know all these things, because how can you know from today on what the needs in 2 years will actually look like? If the whole industry is evolving, if the technology is evolving, if the organization is changing, right? Your startup of today might be a big company tomorrow. So, like, all these things you cannot predict. So you need to stay agile, and you need to evolve with the needs as they come by. And you cannot just predict everything up front that will be needed and then close yourself in a basement for 2 years and just come out afterwards again to see that the world has entirely changed. Even more so, you will actually invest into things that you do not need. Yeah. So this big challenge of having such big feedback cycles with your user base as well means that you don't understand up until you actually ship this huge project if this is actually being useful. I have seen multiple projects that were built, again, with like 1 or 2 years of engineering investment, just to have them for run for 3 months in production and then being shut down again because nobody was actually using them. Or something else now came on the market that actually solved the problem in a much easier way that you could just buy into and that you could just use to solve the same problem. But it's so crucial as well to again understand that it's impossible to build the perfect platform upfront because you cannot predict what are the things that you actually need with several months or even years in advance. But even more so, you will not know everything that will actually be needed, and you will actually need to stay active and you need to stay agile to actually react to those things to be able to provide all the actual needs to the user base that you have. And that brings me directly to the next one, which is you should instead apply product thinking, not only to your data products, as we discussed earlier, but also to platform development. When you're actually looking at your data infrastructure platform, you should build the platform capabilities for the needs of the data product teams, right? So again, assuming now you have the first team that has built their first data product and they have run a successful MVP. Now the next team is actually doing the same thing while the same team is starting to build a couple more additional data products on top of that. And while they are doing so, more and more you actually learn, okay, what are the things that they are actually missing to make their lives easier? How can we now scale the data product development to actually support those teams, right? And these are where the capability needs are actually born. And of course, there are a couple of capabilities that are so inherently crucial that pretty much everyone needs this. Every organization will run into these type of requirements at some point. Again, covering some of the basics, right? Providing compute capacity, providing storage capacity, providing scheduling for your jobs, like these type of things. But even there, the tech space is evolving, right? Like, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, like we were all storing all our data in Hadoop clusters. I don't know, like 30 years ago, it was all in a big data warehouse or in local databases for application processing. Now it's all on a cloud store. Like, who knows what comes in the next 10 years down the line? Like, where will we end up with our data again? And like these things, of course, are pretty massive changes where also the offerings across the industry are changing and evolving so rapidly that you definitely should continue to make use of that and try to evaluate the new things that are coming to the market every once in a while, because they might cover exactly the needs that you have. But to be able to do so, it is super important to first understand what is it that you actually need. And you do not build the platform that offers compute resources for 1,000 teams when you actually have 2 teams that are needing it right now. And don't get tempted by cool and fancy. Yeah, there's so many new things that just come out there that are new kids on the block that urge you to play with new technologies, new approaches. You are being approached on LinkedIn by like so many different new companies that want to try out their amazing startup idea with you every single day. It's impossible to like stay on top of all of this, but also to predict which of those will actually be successful, right? And as most of us are working in bigger companies and businesses, of course, you also want to look into continuity with the partners that you're actually looking into. Yeah, so it's nice to try out new things every once in a while, but you want to also have some things that are a bit more battle proven, because if you actually commit to something, this is probably gonna stick around for 5 years at least. And this is something where you also need to make good decisions and where you cannot always get tempted by the next big open source project or the next big hype, like data mesh, by the way. So like these are things where it's always important to first understand what they are really about and to really get down to the core and have a good understanding. and do not just let you get pushed by, oh, this is the next cool new technology, I'm jumping into it right away. Number 6, sorry, that was number 6. This is number 7. Don't create a platform with central data responsibility. Interestingly enough, this is actually the world where most of us are coming from, right? Coming from the perspective where the central platform teams are the ones that are also responsible for the content of all the data that they store, that are responsible for all the processes around the data, for all the pipelines around the data. And they are the massive bottleneck in the company to actually are supposed to help out every single individual out there that has any need in terms of data, right? They are helping the producers in fixing their errors when something's going wrong with the data. They are helping the users investigating any issues that they are discovering, but maybe also performance optimizing some of their jobs, some of their queries. But ultimately, like, always needing to understand the domain specific context of every single use case that is out there, because that is just how historically central data organizations have grown over the years. So this is really like where most of us have ended up as the bottleneck of the company, and it is important to not repeat this mistake. Right? It's important to ensure that we are actually setting up ourselves, like I mentioned earlier, no longer with responsibility about the content and the processes about specific use cases or domains, but to actually build platform capabilities as self-service, right? So that all the users are enabled to do those jobs by themselves. And in many cases, that also means you need to simplify the tooling that is being offered to the people out there, right? Like, I don't know, like up until a year ago or so, like every single team that wanted to run some transformation around data needed to have a data engineer, because it was impossible to use the right technology to actually take on these capabilities around building data transformation or building something that prepares your data for the use case that you actually have at hand, without having a deep understanding of the data engineering space. This is changing, right? Like engines are changing, interfaces are changing. I've seen many analysts over the last year or so, or even longer than that already, that are able to build a data pipeline with SQL now, that are even able to build data pipelines just with drag and drop, because the interfaces are getting simpler and simpler, and you are enabling a broader user group to actually use the tools that you are offering. And this is the direction that we also want to take here, where we want to enable those people, not just by saying, okay, this is a template, this is how you get your compute resources, and then you're on your own again, and you need to figure it out by yourself, but to also simplify the interfaces and going one step further in the services that we are actually offering. Because if we don't do that, again, we tie ourselves to the needs of the specific domains, right? Like we really, again, like hop into like the very nitty-gritty details of the specific use cases. And it's easy to set up something quickly because you know better, right? You have done this 50 times. But again, like getting out of that use case again, this is the hard part. This is actually what makes it so difficult. Number 8, define domains following your business capabilities. I talked a little bit about it in the beginning to follow this like domain-driven design ideas also for your data domains. But really where this originally comes from is it goes much broader than just focusing on the data side of things. I have to say, and this was one of the things that I was talking about in one of my very first data mesh presentations, this is one of the things where in my current organization, we got incredibly lucky because we did a proper reshuffling of the organization to focus on specific business capabilities and form domains around them way before data mesh even became a thing. Yeah, so we were just one step ahead when data mesh actually came around the corner, because somebody had similar ideas before, and the company actually did a great job of setting itself up to actually follow the business capabilities and to define the domains accordingly to the needs that we actually had from the business side. Right. financial investments have to be backed by the business. Yeah, so like if I'm now looking, I'm a tech team, I want to build something new and fancy and shiny and play around with new tech and whatever. If there's no business use case for that, that thing gets lost. Yeah, like you will not like businesses where the money is coming from. Those are the folks that are ultimately paying you for what you're doing in your day-to-day job. So whatever you are doing has to have at least some benefit that feeds back into the business side. And especially when you have central tech organizations that, I don't know, have like 2,000 people within them or so, it's incredibly easy to get lost in your tech bubble. Just like play around with these new and cool tools again, running back into the mistake of like building the perfect platform up front because nobody's doubting you, because you're just like this big tech bubble that is eating up a lot of money and nobody is really looking into the details, right? Like once the situation comes around where like maybe the situation of the economy is changing, like it is currently, then all of a sudden you might want to take a bit better look into like how are you actually spending your money, right? And this is when it is so important that you have your business actually be behind the financial investments that you're making, and to actually have the teams that are working on these parts, be they on the tech side or on the business side, to actually work together on the use cases that they want to solve. Because ultimately, having your tech teams close to the business allows for end-to-end responsibility. And this is a very, very crucial point that I really want to emphasize on. Again, bringing the tech teams and the business teams together allows that you can actually take care of challenges end-to-end. And this is what it really means to take on domain responsibility, right? Look at things like, I don't know, payments, logistics, web shops, or whatever. Like splitting them apart by the business functionalities that you're actually looking for, but then adding the required tech capabilities to those pillars. This is what can really allow them to actually move forward on their own. While, again, you want to have the central platform teams to support them with guidance as well as self-services to do the best as they can. But only if you involve the tech folks also into the actual business problems that you're solving, only then they will be able to really understand and to really best serve your needs that you have from the business side. Number 9, I love that one. Don't get ahead of yourself. I've seen a lot of people that came to me and asked me questions about, for instance, this amazing data platform that they wanted to build. And I asked them, well, what do you actually need, right? Like what is it? Like how many data products do you have? And have you reflected on what is it that are actually the shortcomings that they have? And then they told us, no, this data products, they haven't started with that yet. And, or even worse, there's multiple use cases where, and that's, I think, probably the most prominent one, where people ask me about federated governance without even having a single data product yet. And, well, you don't get far with these type of questions, right? People usually look at the setup that they already have within their organization, and they know governance is a thing. And they usually also know it doesn't work in the current setup. So they hear about this concept of federated governance, and they are like, well, this has to be the solution that I've been looking for all these years. Let's just apply this and then be done. And even better, then we just call it data mesh, right? If you haven't done your groundwork, that doesn't work. Yes, you can make your governance approaches more, let's say, distributed in your organization, but if you haven't really thought about actually building data products or how to set up your domains, then federated governance won't get you far. Like this is not the savior that you have been looking for if governance is the biggest pain that you're actually having. Like really don't get ahead of yourself, because it's important that you take it one step at a time and you solve the foundation first, you lay the groundwork, and then you build up on top of that. This is a huge journey. Yeah. Take it one step at a time and really, really, really learn what works for you specifically and what does not. Yeah. Like I've been, as Scott mentioned at the beginning, like I've been on this journey now already for 3 years, like being in the data mesh space and talking about it all the time. And still, if I would have to give you an honest opinion about where do we stand, I would say way at the beginning. Yeah, like we're still just getting started. Yes, there might be like various areas where we might be one step ahead of a lot of other organizations out there, and some things where we maybe were even already having a better setup to begin with, because we had great ideas that made it through already before data mesh was even the thing, right? But when it comes to really like pushing this as like a mindset shift across into your organization on how you make conscious decisions of how you're dealing with your data, this is still something where like we are still so much at the beginning. And also a good friend of mine once mentioned to me as well, you will probably never be done with data mesh. You will just get better at practicing data mesh. You know, like thinking about it more as like an evolving target, as something that encourages good behavior across an organization. It's not, data mesh is not a technology. You don't just implement it and migrate all your users and you're done, right? It's something that needs to grow as a habit into your organization. And you really need to take this one step at a time. And again, I can emphasize that not enough, learn what really works for you and what does not, because every data mesh that I've seen out there is different. Every single company that I've talked to makes different decisions in different points in time. And they take different routes. And ultimately, they need to define, again, what are the capabilities that they specifically need, and then figure out what are the solutions just for those parts. And this is a branch that, this is a tree of branches where you can take so many different paths, and nobody can tell you upfront where is it that your organization will actually end up in. Number 10, last but not least. Evangelize data mesh. That's exactly what I'm doing here now with my banana suit, so that you might have a memorable experience and you might remember this guy in yellow talking about data mesh. And maybe then 1 or 2 facts of what I've shared here were actually the things that will stick with you as well, and that you will bring forward in your organization. But when I'm looking at data mesh, it's not just about the organization that needs to change, but it's also about the individuals, right? Like we need to talk to the people around us, and we need to share our knowledge and our experiences, right? It's so crucial to get a common understanding with the people that you want to take along the journey. Again, data mesh is it's a buzzword, right? It's very fuzzy when you just think about the term itself. So it is even more crucial to come to a common ground with the people around you, that you actually understand, ideally, the pillars behind it and not the term itself, like I mentioned earlier, to understand them in a common way, so that you can share a common understanding and you can actually have a baseline upon which it is then much more fruitful discussions that actually help you to move your organization forward. Because as I mentioned, right, as much as data mesh is about culture and organization, it is also about the mindset shift of the individual, right? Like ultimately, we are the ones that make the decisions about what are we actually doing with our data. And this might go as far forward as making a business decision based on the data that I'm actually looking at. But this also goes as far back as to understanding first, what is the potential in the data that I actually have at hand, and how should it be treated so that I can actually make the maximum value out of that. Yeah. So don't just look at it from a perspective that you want to run around and, again, tell everybody it's cool and fancy, but really like have meaningful conversations with the people around you, share your experiences, share your knowledge, and also share material that you have with the people around you, so that they can actually come to the same baseline, so that you can have more fruitful discussions about your specific setup, your specific organization, because that is what you need to reflect on to then actually be able to make progress. So let's quickly recap what were the things that we have talked about so far. 10 do's and don'ts of data mesh. Number 1, demystify the buzzword. Yeah, we went a little bit into the 4 pillars once more, covering the basics, covering the common ground, so that we have a common understanding of what are we actually talking about on the data mesh side. Number 2, commit to the pillars, not the term. Yeah, as we mentioned many times, data mesh is in fact a buzzword. It is a hype. But if you actually look at the pillars behind them, they have much more meaning to the people that you're talking to. They are the things that are actually getting relevant to your organization or to your local setup compared to data mesh itself, which is just a word and which means so many things for so many different people. Number 3, start small, but with commitment. Find a good team that is actually capable of building a data product MVP and have them learn how to do that. Yeah, have them make mistakes, have them figure out things, find the use case that is valuable, that actually allows you to prove that data mesh can add value to your organization. But also do not use a business critical one right from the start, because you might be doing number 4, you might actually be overloading your people when you put too much expectations on them right from the start. Yeah. So don't pick teams that are already overloaded and don't push additional responsibilities on teams where you are sure they will not be able to actually live up to the expectations. But find the ones that you think are already capable of that might be a bit more tech savvy, that might already have a product manager in the team to actually be able to move forward with your MVP. Number 5, don't build the perfect platform upfront. You do not know what are the things that you will actually need in the end from both directions of then actually not building things that will be needed, but also the other way around, from actually wasting time building things that will ultimately not be needed and that will be trashed again afterwards. Instead, number 6, apply product thinking to platform development. Yeah, like also look at your platform as a product, again, that is building services for the different teams in your organization that is there to make their life easier. Yeah, so again, they are your stakeholders. They understand best what are the pain points that they are dealing with in their day-to-day life. And you want to understand those pain points and those use cases so that you can, again, come up with services that make your organization as a whole run more smoothly and that makes the day-to-day job of the people actually working with data easier across the organization. Number 7, don't create a platform with central data responsibility. Again, this is where most of organizations have actually come from centralized data setups where the platform teams were also responsible for the data in itself. Don't repeat that mistake, but rather try to build a platform that is more focusing on self-services, that is more focusing on enablement and not so much on actually taking on responsibility about the content or about domain-specific requests that ultimately you will not get out of anymore once you have actually like piled up a bunch of those because you've taken on this additional responsibility that is not supposed to end up in the platform. Number 8, define domains following your business capabilities. Yeah, this is again like super huge, where you want to ensure that you understand how your business actually works, like what are the functions that your business requires, and to not set up just your business teams for actually meeting those business requirements, but actually have your tech organization follow. Yeah, bringing the tech teams close to the business actually enables you to make end-to-end decisions and also execute on those decisions because you have the right people in the job in the same group, in the same room to actually follow up on the points that you are deciding here. Number 9, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't ask for federated governance if you haven't built your first data product yet. Yeah, like those concepts are tightly interconnected. And yes, some parts might not be required for others, but generally speaking, you first want to build the foundation for yourself so that you actually have solid ground to rely on before you want to move into the more advanced concepts that will then help you to pull the different things together that will be addressing pain points that you might not even have today before you haven't gotten there, before you haven't gotten your foundation straight. And number 10, evangelize data mesh. It is super important to talk to the people around you and to come to a common understanding of what data mesh actually means for you, for your organization, in your environment. Because only if you have a common understanding, then you can have fruitful discussions with the people around you. And that will be the baseline to actually move your organization forward into, driving into a brilliant future where everything is perfect around data in your organization. I have a bonus one. Read Data Mesh in Practice. This is a very small booklet that I mentioned at the beginning that me and my good friend Arif have written together that you can find on O'Reilly. You can also find it on Starburst. Just check that out. It's just 50 pages. It's not as big as it looks like on the picture here. A lot of the things that I have mentioned throughout the presentations are actually originally written down there as well. And it goes much more into the details with some practical examples, which of course the general data mesh principles, but also with like some how to get started guides, as well as some pitfalls and best practices that you might want to jump into or avoid on the respective side. With that being said, thanks a lot. That was 10 do's and don'ts of data mesh. I'm Max, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have further discussions with you folks and to take a bunch of questions.
Okay, so thank you so much, Max, for the presentation. I just threw in the chat the link to grab that ebook on Starburst, so anybody can do that. Max, why don't we go through some of the questions? So Peter had asked, will a report or a presentation be made available for offline reading? That's kind of the specific thing of the, it's not exactly this, but we'll also have the slides. This will be up on YouTube. So how would you differentiate between a good data product and a not so good data product? And I think this can be like, let's talk about how would you think about what is good, but also how can the users like give feedback, or how can you determine kind of somewhat objectively whether a data product is good or not? Is it that the user satisfaction, is it that the use case was confirmed and it met what it was expected, or you might have expected something and the data product is good in and of itself, but the use case isn't good? Or like, how do you think about what is a good data product and what isn't?
Yeah, I think like the simplest answer is that it boils down to does it solve the use case that it was designed for, right? And like this is of course it's a very easy starting point, but there's much more that you can add on top of that, right? Like it is important that you somehow measure your success of your data product, right? You understand like, okay, what is the use case that it was built for, right? Like, is it fulfilling that? Like, is it doing so in a good way? Is the user actually happy with what you're offering there? But then also going on top of that, is this potentially reusable, right? Like, are there more use cases out there that can actually be served by the same thing? That is like how it can easily scale into, let's say, different angles of success, right? You can have data products that are very specific to just one use case and doing one thing right, and can be great at that. And that is definitely where all the value is coming from. But you can also have data products that are becoming much more broad, like, for instance, having the default sales data product that represents the sales of your organization, which is then the one data product that is used across all the financial reporting, all the management dashboards, and even for some machine learning use cases that want to connect certain parts of your business with the sales that you have. Yeah, so there's different angles to what success can really mean. And it's important that you understand well what is the angle that you're aiming for, and to be really excellent at what you're looking at.
And there's an interesting episode of the podcast. It's unfortunately going to be out in about 2 months because I kind of went on a recording spree. But yeah, about impact measurement and thinking about one was the use case, the thing that wasn't true or not, but like two, what is the cost? What is the return on investment here, right? Like, what is the actual cost of this? What is the ongoing cost? And then like Carlos Sauna, whose episode is going to come out relatively soon, talked about the time between when you initially deploy a data product and when you actually, when it becomes more solidified, that you need to have that learning space as the consumer and producer start to, so the initial kind of MVP of that data product might be kind of low quality, but that MVP, when it becomes actually a solidified product, that is when you start to measure, was it good or not, right? You start to measure the impact and all of that. So, I apologize. Apparently Zoom changed all of the settings on this because the chat wasn't supposed to be disabled, but apparently it is. So I apologize to everybody for the chat being disabled. Thank you to the person who had alerted me to that. So Travis had asked, many customers do not yet have a kind of data product practice. And so they need to also develop that while developing their actual data products. Like, what guidance do you recommend for such companies? Like, how do you think about maturing somebody? Are you building the plane while you're flying? Or is it more you're kind of building the cart as you're moving forward behind the horse, where it's not quite as dangerous? Or how do you think about that?
So luckily, when building data products, no lives are endangered. At least I hope. I guess it depends on the area that you're in. But of course, you learn a lot as you go. And like some of these extreme examples that you have thrown in might be somewhat accurate in the data space, where of course everybody needs to start somewhere, right? And so did we as well. And but now I can also see that most of the people that were like that they were part of like the first data product MVPs are now the biggest evangelists in the organization as well, in terms of like sharing the learnings and bringing others up to speed. And it comes from so many different angles as well, because it's also not just you as the data product builder that needs to learn, but for instance, also the stakeholders that need to learn along the way on how to actually use data products, because they are doing so in the first place as well, in the first time as well. Like previously, they might have just been consuming data through some BI tables or dashboards or whatever. And now it might actually be changing on how that works, how to follow up on data quality metrics, for instance, how to report certain issues. Like all these kind of things might be massively changing. And so does the data platform as well, right? Like the data platform is also learning as you go and as you build your first data products. There's definitely like not a single individual out there that can just like teach you all these things and like advance your journey by 10 years. That is unfortunately not possible at the moment. But of course, like staying in touch with the community is also super crucial here. Yeah, so that you can have these conversations among yourselves within the community to talk to people that either are going through the same experience at the moment as you speak together, or that are already 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, that can already warn you to like avoid certain pitfalls, or to already give you some hints on like what are the things that really worked out in their case. And again, like for us, it was really that way. Like the first people just stumbled in there. They built something as they believed that would actually be fit. They iterated over that many, many times until they actually arrived at this hardened data product that Scott just mentioned, to then actually really have something that was useful. And they were then also really involved in, let's say, defining standards and like writing down their concepts and to then share them back with the community to help the organization as a whole advance further.
Yeah, if I were to say another do kind of is to reach out and talk to people, because so much of this is so much about exchanging that information and even bouncing ideas off of somebody, or an episode of the podcast that I had put out was you're like the most important thing in data mesh is you're not alone, because everybody is experiencing a lot of the same challenges. And just in data, we haven't historically been very open about, I have no idea how to handle this issue, or we're coming across this and we don't have an answer. So, Peter had asked, like, a lot of this was kind of high level, things. It's very much of the get yourself in order, get your organization in order. Do you have any like kind of specifics around like organization of, organization ownership of data. Like I actually had a question about that when you said the central platform. Did you mean the central platform team shouldn't own the data because the platform itself should be able to own the data? Or like, I don't know how you think about that, but like anything around how you actually move that ownership into the domains, or they own the actual data itself, but they don't own necessarily the underlying storage or things like that. But like, how do you train the domain teams? Like, how do you get them actually too capable? How are you doing onboarding and like auto scaling and things like that? Do you have anything real specific that you would talk about that you've like your kind of specific tips and tricks that you would, rather than kind of the high level do's and don'ts?
There was like some very specific cases that we had where the setup was the following, that you usually had like source data teams that are producing data somewhere, that are only operating on the operational side of the business and that are not connected to the data space whatsoever. They just produce some operational data and that flows through some system and ends up in the storage system that then other people start making sense of that. And then we had BI teams who were sitting on top of that and making sense of the data and transforming it into something that then actually becomes useful for the business. And then you had business teams on top of that that were actually using this data to make decisions, right? And this setup was incredibly difficult to reason about, because on the one hand side, whenever you had an issue and somebody got called up and paged on call during the night because some data was not available, somebody was telling you, yeah, this data is important. And you're asking them, well, how important? What is it used for? Why am I paged during the night? And the only answer that you get back is, well, it is important because there is a use case and they definitely need this. I'm like, so what? Yeah. And this was like one of the big things where we started to actually try the approach the other way around, where we said, well, let's start with what this is actually used for. Let's go to that use case and understand what is the value that they are generating. Let's quantify this, right? It's really like down to what is the impact on the end customer on our webpage if this data is not available. Yeah. And this allowed us to not only quantify what the BI team was actually doing there, because they were usually this platform team in the middle in the general picture that was suffering the most, because they were just trying to make sense of something and give it to someone else, but they were always the man in the middle. But now actually being able to quantify the use case itself and allowed the BI team to understand their value, but then again, also give them an argument again to go back to the source teams and tell them, well, if you provide better quality data here, this will actually give us like $500,000 in value because we reach higher sales towards the end customer. And all of a sudden, this becomes a completely different conversation, right? Because you actually start from the value and you do not just start from the technical problem of the team that doesn't want to take up the responsibility around data. Yeah, and so this was like one of the specific examples that we had, where just turning around the thinking and building it on top of the actual business value and having very specific and concrete use cases, and then pushing this down the chain upwards allowed us to actually also transform the thinking of the teams. Because all of a sudden, when you see, well, there's this one use case on the data side that can generate $500,000 of value, you think thrice if you much rather want to do this performance optimization in your backend service instead.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue with this is that there's so many things of it depends, and also like the very specific question. One thing that I'm seeing that I would really, really recommend people about is really think about how ownership actually works. Because if somebody is not capable, right? If you think about teaching somebody to ride a bike, do you go out there and you go out there with your 5-year-old, and I'm not talking, pejoratively talking about the domain teams, but they don't know how to do data. Do you go out there and you say, I got you a new bike, go ride to school 4 miles from now, right? Here's maybe a helmet. Or do you start with the trike and then you do the bike with the training wheels, and then you go to a very, very flat surface and you put all of the things on them? You transfer that capability over time. That's one of the big things where I'm seeing people are just getting it wrong, because they just go, domain you now own data, and that doesn't work. So, but a lot of this is like, you kind of have to have one-on-one conversations and pin people down on very specific questions, because it is hard to think of all the different do's and don'ts, because there's 100 of them, right? Well, we tried this and it really didn't work well, but yeah. So Valentina had asked what it means to have data team or the data management team closer to the business. If you have already, a data management tribe, will you split the people inside into each domain? Like, are you recommending embedding those people? Are you recommending embedding them for a period of time? Are you like, how are you thinking about that?
I'd love to ask a question back there. And what exactly do you mean with data management tribe? Maybe you Scott, you can watch out in the chat if something is coming from that side. How I understood it from a basic perspective is there's two different parts when it comes to data management responsibilities. The one is about actually building the tools so that data management is possible. And the other is to actually execute on taking care of data management. And I would clearly split those, right? I would definitely say building the tooling to enable the people to do data management, that is a platform capability. This is something that should stay central. Whereas then actually doing the job and taking care of this is something that needs to sit within the domains, because that is where the knowledge is as well, right? So like you want to have your data expert also be the one that I don't know, provides the documentation about the data, for instance, that is maybe responsible for checking on new use cases and granting access to whatever you're providing there. Right, like from this type of angle, it is important to understand the specific use cases, and this is where you need the exports decentrally. But when it comes to providing the tools and the features and the capabilities for the teams to actually do their job, this is what I think is a platform capability that also should stay with the data platform.
Okay. And Patrick had asked, you talked about keeping the tech team close to the business. What types of tech people, or what are the specific roles they play with the business? Are they business analysts, or is this a different role?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Ideally, it's cross-functional, right? Because let's just imagine you have, I don't know, there's one business team that is responsible for running your shop. Now you have one tech team that is sitting next to that that's actually operating the shop, right? Ideally, those two should be close together, because only if you actually are close to the people that run the shop, you understand what are their pain points and how can you actually improve the shop so that it becomes better and that you can have the right offerings that are needed there. And now you advance this towards the data space. Now you're actually saying, well, I now have the tech team that owns the shop, but the shop itself produces data. And the shop produces data about sales. The shop produces data about, I don't know, clicks on the web page, and maybe many other things. And this data now is also valuable to the organization. And now you want to have a similar team or the same team, depends on the use case. If it's a shop, probably similar team because of size. That now can also is again sitting close to the same business team and the same tech team to own the data part about it. Yeah, so to actually be responsible for this data that is being produced, not only for the operational side of things, but also for the analytical world. And again, the reason why you want to have them close together is because they share a common business understanding. And this is like where the importance is coming from. If you have a central tech team that is taking care of 5 different domains, and they are switching context left and right, and all they read is, I don't know, Jira tickets with requirements every day, and they implement exactly what is written there, then you always have a certain misunderstanding, and you always have a certain disconnect from the problems that you're actually solving. And this is why you want to actually have them close together, because you get the possibility to share the same domain knowledge, and you get the possibility to actually be closer to each other and collaborate on a more continuous basis.
Yeah, I think that context exchange is incredibly important and always overlooked. And so like, you just need people to get into a room and not say we have this exact specific agenda, right? Tim Tischler talked about that in his episode of the podcast, where he just said, sometimes it's just good to do a show and tell. Sometimes it's good to have scheduled time to check in with each other and just say, what are you seeing? So Roberto threw something out with some Latin, and I don't know what it says, but who, in your opinion, should govern the federated governance team activities and how? And I think this is potentially a very nuanced and or kind of confusing-ish question, because it's, when you think about federated governance, like when you think about that aspect of it, of who is doing the governance activity and then who is also like enabling the federated governance activity. Do you still have a centralized governance team? Like how are you doing your governance in general? Like when it's the domain, are they doing 100% of it? Are they doing 80% of it? Like how, and who's monitoring that?
Yeah. So of course the question originally comes from who's policing the police, right? But I think like when you're looking at a federated governance setup, that question becomes different, because there's not inherently one body that is controlling everyone, and then you need to control that body again to make sure they're not running rampant. Instead, you have like representatives of the different functions. And I think it also then again breaks down into the specific needs in terms of who then actually has the ultimate responsibility for that, right? For instance, let's take a look at intersections between domains. Like these are usually topics that are very specific to those two domains. And while, of course, the federated governance group should have an environment where it's encouraged to actually discover these cases, ultimately, it's down to those two domains to actually like figure out how they can solve an interoperability problem best. But taking a look at a completely opposite example, of course, you will still have a compliance body, for instance, right? Like you will still have a legal team and you will still have a security team, and they still own certain compliance processes, but they will bring this into the federated governance group and discuss these topics on eye level with all the other teams together. And that might even make it simpler in terms of rolling out certain rules or responsibilities. Because if you have your 10 domains in there, and then you bring in your security experts who's talking about, I don't know, GDPR deletion, as I mentioned earlier, now all the domains are immediately aware that something is up and that they need to act. And then you can, in the same group, maybe also have the discussions with the platform teams that are involved as well, to see that, well, if it's a need for all the domains at the same time, maybe we actually want to build a platform capability for that. Right? But ultimately, the ownership will still stay with the legal body or the security body for that matter. It's just that the forum becomes a different one on how these topics are discussed and how the impact is also assessed for the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of it just kind of also boils down to, again, it depends. It depends.
Yeah, of course. Like, I mean,
it's a frustrating answer, but it is like, like the more that you look into the specifics, you can't give just a single overarching answer for every single thing, and it's different for every organization. If
let me know once you get there. Yeah. Let me know how you do it once you get there, and then we can continue this conversation.
Yeah. So either Jan or Jan, from your experience, are data meshes typically realized using a single platform, data warehouse, data lake? Since data products exist within a platform, is it difficult to share it with the rest of the organization if you don't use the same platform?
I would love if we only had one platform. We don't even just have one platform within our data platform. Now, of course, like it's not always easy, right? And of course, historically speaking, there's always things that have grown because certain decisions were made in certain business units or domains at some point to introduce yet another system because there was not enough awareness of the offerings that already existed. And that's how you end up with like 15 different BI systems and 5 different compute engines and also many different storage locations, right? And there's always a possibility to get these things together. And either you go the slow and painful route and actually start consolidating, which probably pays out in the long run, but that's not something that every business is usually capable of doing, or at least willing to invest in. Let's just put it like that. So often you're just looking out also for possibilities on how to actually bring things together, right? And there are, of course, things like out there like Query Federation or things like this, where you actually have engines that you can set up on top of other things to actually bring them together in the federation layer. Yeah, there is possibilities and there is technology that can solve these type of needs as well. And if this is actually the capability that you're looking at for your specific organization, have a look at that, because that could help you actually to move into that direction.
Yeah,
I can say from our side, most of the time, we are trying to strike a balance between consolidation and bringing things together, but also between solving the user problems with better integration between the systems. Yeah, so that if data is stored in one system, that we have the possibility either to directly access it from there, or maybe actually have an in-sync copy in another location, really depending on the use case and really depending on the.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are just kind of trying to get to a place where it doesn't matter at all the underlying storage mechanism for the information and the data. It's all the API, it's all the exposure, it's how can somebody go in and experience the overall data mesh with all of the nodes instead of each individual product. You're experiencing that individual product. And so that if you only have to query at the kind of experience plane layer, which is still evolving and developing, and I haven't seen anybody really talk about having nailed that, but that experience plane layer, if you can get to that, then you it makes it so that it's much easier to actually not have to really care that much about how something is stored, right? You care about, can you get the information, can you combine it, can you interoperate it, can you do that, instead of like, I have to care that this is stored in S3 versus this is stored, you know, in HDFS or Hadoop or, you know, and anything like that. So but it's a difficult question that I still think people don't have a great answer right now, and it's a frustrating question. But I think, like you said, you've been using like Trino and Spark and stuff. You said that stuff publicly, so I'm not dropping anything, but that you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that people are leveraging, but it's not that there's a one size fits all, because it's all about the use case and what the team can do and what really works best for the use case, and then balancing that use case versus the cost of doing something special. So the last question we have here is from Valentina is, how do you define domains? Like, is finance a domain, or will it be using the data from multiple other domains, or like, and how do you think about kind of the domain versus the subdomain and the subdomain of subdomain, you know, that hierarchy? Like, are you thinking about it? You've got 5 total domains at the high level, and like, how do you think about that? How do you think about the capabilities of each of those as you go up and down?
Yeah, like, ultimately, it boils down to how your business is set up, right? Like, and I would definitely say start at a high level. And like, if these are like the 5 main business areas that you have, then start with those as your core domains, and then try to tickle it down, right? Like, ultimately, it doesn't even matter to me personally, like how many levels you have, or like how this spreads down towards the lower area. Ultimately, for me, it's more important that within the domains, you actually have people that take up ownership, right? And like, this is more important of a starting point, I would say, than to say which level to start at, right? Because like the higher levels will not deliver the most value, for that matter, because the actual data products are built somewhere by teams. And the teams are usually not sitting at an SVP level. Yeah, so that's why I think it's good to understand how the business is structured, and to ensure that your data organization is structured the same way as the business is structured. And like, going this along the way is, you should always start like at the highest level and understand these. And if you have like 5 core business functions, that this is definitely your starting point. But then if this trickles down into subdomains and sub-subdomains or whatever, however you want to call them, ultimately it only boils down to you need to have teams within those areas to actually pick up the responsibility and to take on the ownership around the data that you have there.
Yeah, like if you're in a physical goods type of company, like your team may not have a bunch of software engineers. So, you know, you need to embed more capabilities into that team versus if you're at a SaaS company or like you're an online retailer. So presumably there's a lot of software engineers in most of your teams. And so, you know, it's about training them up versus, you know, trying to train up, you know, somebody that's actually like doing the warehouse duties. Well, you could train them up, right? Not saying that you can't, but they're not already building software. So then trying to teach them how to do software best practices and data best practices and things. So it's a different model for each team, but or for each organization. But again, Max, this has been so great. Thank you so much for spending the time. Any way you'd like to sign off or just kind of say, you know, au revoir?
No, thanks a lot again for all of you. Was a great time here. Great questions as well. Feel free to connect with me as well with the things that are on screen right now. Read the book and let me know afterwards what you think of it.